And he keeps being a coup plotter, right? Because until he withdraws this interview he gave to Folha on June 14th, threatening the Supreme Court with the use of force, he remains a coup plotter. I'll remind you again since he hasn't withdrawn his statement. Go ahead.
It's a bad scenario because we're talking about possibly using force. We're talking about the possibility of direct interference between the branches of government. That's exactly what nobody wants. And I'm not saying this, for God's sake, I'm not making any threats. I'm just analyzing a scenario which is something real that could happen or might not. Bolsonaro supports someone, this candidate gets elected, grants a pardon or makes a deal here with the National Congress to approve an amnesty. In 2 or 3 months it's done, but the Supreme Court rules it unconstitutional, so everyone returns here. It doesn't work. That doesn't work. Any candidate President Bolsonaro supports must make that commitment.
That's a coup threat.
For those on YouTube, let's put it this way. Flávio Bolsonaro is in the final stretch of the conventions. He hasn't defined a vice presidential candidate for the ticket, and he's having trouble expanding alliances. Flávio said he plans to select a woman as his running mate, ideally from a party open to allying with his campaign. But the parties he's approached haven't agreed yet. And the deadline set by electoral law for the parties to hold their conventions ends on Wednesday. That's the time frame Flávio intends to use to decide on his running mate and the coalitions he'll take to the polls. That's right.
Man, it's tough for him, right? Let's see. And we can see it's not even because he's doing badly in the polls, right? He actually seems to be doing well in the polls. But it really seems like what really seems to be missing is trust. From the other parties, right? There are real difficulties. Many parties like PP, União in the Northeast, a formal alliance, can create major difficulties for these parties there because of Lula's big vote, in the Northeast. There was no trust built there that promises would be kept. Right? Yeah, it might seem silly, but that decision by Flávio back then to go after Ciro Nogueira, when he finally got caught in the net, right there in the master investigation, right? And Flávio showed up saying, this is a very serious investigation and so on. And then he surprises even his own allies with this movie story, right? The movie about the request for 134 million to Daniel Volcario, right? 62 having already been transferred. Then the feeling was, well, this is the kind of guy who's going to look out for himself and his family and won't help anyone else, right? And then it didn't seem like it was a great idea, right? So far it's been tough.
In an unprecedented act of transparency to fight misinformation and bring voters closer to the democratic process, the Superior Electoral Court opened an electronic voting machine on national television. You can see the image in front of you, the electronic voting machine. The machine is open to try to explain what happens inside and put an end to fake news. The broadcast took place directly from the TSE headquarters building in Brasilia, with the court's electoral technology coordinator, Rafael Azevedo, opening the hardware in front of the cameras. Altogether, the broadcast network brought together 24 partners, divided between 13 regional electoral courts and 11 television stations. Can we listen to a little bit? Explanations? Let's listen then.
We'll ask staff to zoom in. See? The slot. Common. After we remove it, what do people do? Rafael?
No, it's this one actually.
This is the result. It's very similar. I'll put it here for you. See how similar they are? There are regular drives, correct? Nothing else special.
It has a specific shape, so you can't insert it upside down, right?
And it also stays secure during any type of transport, whether on land.
So this here is the information storage device.
Result video.
Of result. Votes, everything is all set. And this is the result storage device.
This other one here, this is the application storage device that serves to keep a backup of the data there.
Wonderful.
Well, here setting it up.
So guys, then you saw right before your eyes the flash drive that records our vote, right? So when they ask for paper ballots, they say the system isn't reliable, isn't auditable, which isn't true. Today, they opened up an electronic voting machine. They're showing it from the inside, the radio. They're explaining how the software works. And they even held up the flash drive. Where our vote goes.
And the campaign hasn't even started yet, and there was already controversy about the use of artificial intelligence in the promotional material of pre-candidates. So, to try to curb indiscriminate use, the electoral authorities did the following. Today, they are releasing a guide about the responsible use of this type of tool.
Well, so let's go to Brasilia because Felipe Matoso is connecting with us again to tell us what this guide says. Welcome, Felipe. Hi.
Colombo. Good morning once again to you, to Nara, and to everyone who is with us here on Global News. There are two main objectives that we can talk about because of this decision by the Superior Electoral Court. The first one is an attempt to prevent the spread of content that was deliberately manipulated to spread facts that are clearly false and taken out of context. The goal is also to prevent so-called deepfakes from being used, for example, to benefit one candidate or to harm another candidate. So our team at Global News here in Brasilia prepared some illustrations for us to show now what is allowed and what is not, according to the TSE. Let's put it up on the screen then. First, the list of what's allowed. You can follow along with me. For example, artificial intelligence can be used to create advertising materials, produce illustrative images, and edit videos, subtitle generation, automatic translation, synthetic narration, and a few other things as well. As long as there is an explicit, prominent, and accessible notice that the content was produced with AI. There are possibilities for using artificial intelligence as long as the user is explicitly informed that the content was indeed produced with artificial intelligence. We'll also display what's not allowed on the screen, along with other points from our team. It is forbidden to share false or decontextualized content, use so-called chatbots, avatars, or synthetic content, and you also can't use deepfakes. And there's more. It's also forbidden to post synthetic content 72 hours before and 24 hours after the voting. And in an attempt to contain, therefore, the irregular use of artificial intelligence, the TSE partnered with a number of companies. We'll show them on the screen. These are companies, social media platforms, as well as artificial intelligence companies. And also importantly, TSE's partnership with fact-checking agencies, so that those who use social networks, those who use the internet, can be well informed during this election period.
The order at the Planalto Palace is to ignore the new insults by the Argentine president Javier Milei directed at President Lula. Any reaction is up to the diplomatic team, which has already arranged for the return of the Brazilian ambassador to Buenos Aires. Guilherme Bausa has this report for us. Bausa, good afternoon. Hi.
Sardinho, good afternoon to you, everyone at Studio Y, and all watching on Global News. Look, Javier Milei repeated, right, in these statements, part of what he had already said a week earlier at the National Convention of the Liberal Party, the Saturday before last in São Paulo, which made Flávio the official PL candidate for the presidency. And he repeats it now in this interview with an Argentine media outlet. He says that Lula is a thief, corrupt, and a former prisoner, and also accuses Lula and the PT of interfering in the political process in Argentina. In the previous statements, right, in the first round of attacks that Milei made against President Lula, the reaction of the Brazilian government was to summon the Brazilian ambassador in Buenos Aires, Julio Bitelli, who remains here in Brasilia, and also summon Daniel Raimondi, who is the Argentine ambassador here in Brazil, who also stays here in Brasilia, for a conversation with Foreign Minister Mauro Vieira, in which the Brazilian government expressed its dissatisfaction with Javier Milei's attitude. At the end of last week, there was an assessment by the Brazilian government that the crisis was easing. Javier Milei stopped talking about the subject because the reaction inside Argentina was very bad for him. There were statements from Milei's spokesperson and the Argentine foreign minister aiming to calm the situation, to try to normalize the dialogue between the countries again. So the assessment was that, under those conditions, if things continued that way, Julio Bitelli, the Brazilian ambassador, could return to Buenos Aires this week. With this new round of attacks from Javier Milei, the return is on hold, and there is no longer any prediction of when he will return. So it's unlikely that Julio Bitelli will return this week due to these new attacks, with Milei renewing his attacks on President Lula. There's an important piece of information that I heard from sources at the Planalto Palace, is that the Brazilian government is considering, seriously studying summoning Daniel Raimondi, Argentina's ambassador in Brasilia, again, so that once again Chancellor Mauro Vieira can express his discontent. So this is a possible consequence of these new attacks from Javier Milei. In addition to the decision to keep Julio Bitelli, he should stay longer here in Brasilia until things actually calm down, so that he can return and continue his work at the Brazilian embassy in Buenos Aires.
And we've reached July 2026, when Milei, during a visit to Brazil, called Lula a convict at this PL convention, which confirmed Flávio Bolsonaro as the candidate. He stole the spotlight there. At the convention, he ended up being talked about much more than Flávio Bolsonaro's speech or any other participant. It was a convention also marked by the absence of Michel Bolsonaro, by the lack of an officially chosen vice on this ticket. Anyway, after solemnly ignoring Milei, the journalist asked Lula at a certain moment, as he was leaving his meeting with the president of South Korea at the Itamaraty Palace, what he had to say about Milei. Lula had only spoken to the Brazilian president. He replied by saying, "Who is this guy?" Not clearly showing that he didn't want to get into this subject. But now on the 29th, this past weekend, he called Milei's statement nonsense. Nonsense means foolishness, stupidity. It's a lie. It's nonsense. It can also mean something clumsy. And finally, now it's August 2nd on the 26th in an interview with La Nación, LN+, right, which is the 24-hour news channel of the newspaper La Nación from the La Nación group over there in Argentina. Milei attacked Lula again, saying that he is a thief, corrupt, an ex-convict, and he said that, among other things, that it's much less serious to call someone an ex-convict than the theft that this thief committed. So he shows a clear determination to keep his attacks aimed at President Lula, believing, and in doing so, he will be doing a great service to Flávio Bolsonaro's campaign, which will also be showing, in turn, 100% alignment with Donald Trump. In this wave of supporting right-wing, even far-right governments that have been gaining ground in Latin America, and with that, he might get some benefit from it, among other things, for Milei's great dream in life, which is clearly to be seen as the main political leader in Latin America. That's what he would really like to happen. But I think that depends less on attacking President Lula and more on what he can point to as positive results for the Argentine people, for Argentine society, for the Argentine economy, from his libertarian government over there.
Miriam,